Okay, time being 10:20 on Friday, the 17th. I'd like to call the King County Jobs Committee meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Bates,
Yeah,
Doherty?
She just left, I think.
Doherty here.
Ford,
Ford present.
Strathman,
Strathman here.
Young,
Young here.
Lewis,
Lewis here.
Allen, Pirog, Tepe. You have quorum.
Thank you. If I can have a motion for approval of the minutes from January 13th. Alan moves. Alan moves. Need a second?
Doherty second.
Seconds.
Bates, Doherty,
Yep.
Ford,
Ford, yes.
Strathman,
Yes.
Young,
Young, yes.
Lewis,
Lewis, yes.
Allen. Approved.
Workforce development. That's
Alrighty. So this morning, we have a special presentation. I asked Scott Berger to take his workforce development program, the WIOA, and kind of dig into this for us and explain a little bit about where these grants come from, how they're executed, all those kind of things, because it's a complicated process, but it's also really important to us. So Scott, take it away, please.
Good morning, Madam Co-Chair.
Good morning.
We do have a brief presentation for you. If Blair could, looks like he's sharing his screen. Thank you very much, sir. As requested, we're going to try to give you a brief glimpse into how our workforce development program is structured. I think you know it's a multi-county program, as you can tell from the opening slide. We've got all 3 county seals on the screen. This is a joint venture basically between the 3 counties, as well as the various types of services that we provide. So jumping right into it, first we want to let you know that our program is structured and the services that we deliver are governed at the federal level by the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, which we refer to as WIOA. That's an acronym you're going to hear a lot from us about in the coming months. It's a shorthand for the entire long title of the act. WIOA is basically the federal legislation that organizes the country's public workforce system, which we will tell you a little bit about today. It's made up of a lot of different agencies at multiple levels of government that all play a role in investing and strengthening the workforce. WIOA replaced the Workforce Investment Act, which some of you may remember. We refer to that as WIA. And you might still hear that term from time to time, but just know that WIA is technically no longer in effect, even though there are similarities between the former WIA and the current WIOA Act that we follow. WIOA places an emphasis on bringing alignment with the 4 core partner programs that feed into the Act. They're each referred to as titles, and in the box at the bottom of the screen, you can see we've got WIOA Title 1 through 4 listed there. WIOA also specifies the composition and duties of our Workforce Development Board and requires that all of the core partners are at the board table. So just to let you know kind of who these agencies are, obviously we are Title 1. We administer Title 1 on behalf of the 3 county area. Title 2 is administered at the state level by the Illinois Community College Board, and indirectly and by extension, that includes all of the community colleges throughout the state of Illinois, as well as many nonprofit organizations that deliver adult education and literacy act programs. Title 3 is administered by the Illinois Department of Employment Security, known as IDES. They're commonly known as the Unemployment Office, although that's not their name. And then Title 4 is administered by the Illinois Department of Human Services, or referred to as IDHS. But obviously our focus today is on Title 1. That's the program that we manage and deliver on behalf of 3 counties. Next slide, please. So at the state level, Title I, which is funded by the U.S. Department of Labor, is actually administered by the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, or DCEO. The program is essentially implemented by local workforce development areas. In the map on your screen, you'll see that each of the areas is shaded a different color. And you'll notice that some workforce areas are a single county in size, and others, especially in the more rural parts of the state, can include a dozen or more counties. We sort of straddle the two extremes, being on the edge of Chicago metro area with a workforce area that includes 3 counties, as I mentioned. We're not alone in Northeast Illinois. The Livingston, Grundy, and Livingston-Grundy areas are also included in a multi-county workforce area. I also want to call your attention to the red lines that you'll see on the map of Illinois. Those denote what are the state's economic development regions. Obviously, we're in the northeast corner of the state, economic development region number 4. Illinois has 10 regions in all, and that comes to bear on our programming because we are mandated to collaborate and coordinate with our fellow workforce development areas in our region by virtue of our shared regional Chicagoland economy. Next slide, please. Now, our 3-county area operates under a series of we call foundational documents. The first being an intergovernmental agreement that was passed by all 3 county boards and signed by all 3 county board chairs. That agreement binds us together in the state's eyes as a single entity for the purposes of accessing and delivering Title I services. Our IGA does basically 3 things. It designates Kane County as the grant recipient for the 3-county area. It identifies our county board chairman as the chief elected official for the 3-county area. And finally, it establishes a 3-county workforce development board to oversee our programming. Our programming, as well as other elements of the public workforce development system in our area. Second document is basically an agreement between the CEO and the workforce board prescribing their duties and responsibilities, basically a job description for the workforce board. And finally, the bylaws establish how the board will function, touching on Open Meetings Act, sunshine laws, et cetera. And I do want to note that it just so happens that a member of this committee and the county board serves as the chair of our workforce development board, and that person is Mr. Ron Ford. Next slide, please. This slide captures our workforce board's primary responsibilities. In general, the board has a heavy focus on planning and policy work because their planning and policies that they set guide and direct our program activities. And we implement our program in conformance with those standards, with those policies that have been adopted by the workforce board. The board also oversees what is known as the eligible training provider list. I'll touch on this a little bit later in the presentation, but basically what you need to know is that trainers need to be on this list in order for our participants to be able to use our vouchers or scholarships toward their training expenses. If a trainer is not on this list, we're not permitted to provide scholarship assistance. The board also approves service and expenditure plans or budgets and authorizes contracts for our program. They monitor the overall performance of the program. And finally, the board reviews the financial status of our programming with a special focus on achieving certain prescribed benchmarks, which I'll go into later in the presentation. Next slide. So just a bit about Kane County's role. As I mentioned earlier, we serve as the grantee for the Title I program. In essence, the intergovernmental agreement that we have with DeKalb and Kendall counties assigns the responsibility to my office, the Office of Community Reinvestment, to implement the program on their behalf. We provide staff support to the workforce board, and I do want to note that my colleague Israel Vargas is our workforce board manager, and I did invite him to join us today in your meeting. So thank you for joining us, Israel. Kane County accepts the annual formula allocation and acts as the fiduciary for the program. The county coordinates the delivery of activities that are funded by the program and procures the necessary goods and services to implement the program. And then finally, the county enters into contracts with service providers and is responsible for monitoring their performance. Funding comes to us from the U.S. Department of Labor through the state of Illinois, and then we contract out with a sub-tier of organizations that help us implement the program. So in essence, Kane County's responsibility is to implement this program on behalf of and at the direction of the Workforce Development Board. Next slide, please. Our WIOA funds come to us as annual allocations, and they are based on a formula that takes into account various economic and employment data points. In essence, those data points inform the calculation for the amount of the workforce development funding that the state receives that should be appropriately awarded to our 3-county area based on market conditions, based on needs, based on the severity of unemployment, et cetera. The program is basically 3 programs in one, and it has the very unfancy name of the Adult Dislocated Worker and Youth programs. You'll see those highlighted in the chart below. And these basically represent the 3 target populations for our program: the adults, the dislocated workers, and the youth. As you can see from the chart, I've given you a 4-year trailing funding history. Our allocations have fluctuated rather substantially in the last few years. This is driven first by congressional appropriations, and then subsequently by those economic indicators, those employment indicators. As they change, this affects the calculations and ultimately affects the allocations that our area receives. On average, our area sees somewhere north of $6 million a year. We have been informed that that is likely to decline. I think everyone is very aware of the historically low unemployment rates. And so appropriately, the public sector will be probably scaling back its investment in workforce development services going forward because of that presumably reduced need. Next slide, please. The adult program is for job seekers that are at least 18 years old and who are low income, low skilled, or on public aid. The dislocated worker program is for workers that have basically been laid off or are about to be laid off. And for both these groups, we have a couple of tiers of service that we can provide them. And those are listed in the orange or gold and red boxes on the right-hand side of the screen. Under individualized services, we basically provide one-on-one case management. This involves typically assessing the needs of the individual, helping to establish an employment plan for them, and guiding them through a job search. We might also provide some soft skills training, help them brush up on their interviewing skills, resume development, in some cases, workplace skills. Surprisingly, a lot of folks really don't understand and grasp the responsibility associated with being an employee for an employer. Got to show up on time, got to dress appropriately, et cetera. And then in the red box under training services, this is a more intensive level of service that usually involves enrolling the participants in a training plan to achieve a credential that will help them ultimately gain employment. And most typically, this involves us issuing an individual training account or a scholarship to the individual that helps them defray the costs of obtaining that training. Next slide. Our youth program, the third leg of the stool is the youth program, has an age range of 16 to 24. These are youth that are looking to either gain employment or to re-enter the educational system to finish high school. Both in-school and out-of-school youth are eligible, but the focus is primarily on out-of-school individuals. This is typically the dropout population and the folks that are likely to not see success in a career ahead and maintain self-sufficiency. We do assist youth based on their particular needs. This can be career exploration, helping them re-engage with their education, or in some cases, providing work-based learning, which is where we help to defray the cost of employing a youth on a job to basically serve as a kind of internship experience for them with an area employer. And then finally, we do rely on a group of subrecipient agencies, including the community colleges throughout the 3-county area, to implement these services. Next slide. So let me go back to the training element that I just touched on and give you a little more detail. Basically, this is a scholarship program, and we can award scholarships to job seekers in all 3 of the categories: adults, dislocated workers, and youth. In all cases, we're providing assistance to help fund tuition, fees, books, and most of our participants complete their training in a 2-year time frame. We do have a lot of folks that seek training from the community college system. And the amount of assistance that we can provide per participant is capped by our Workforce Development Board at $10,000 per participant. Also, as I mentioned earlier, the eligible training provider list is basically the list of eligible trainers that our participants can seek out training from. This is a list that has been certified by our workforce board. Each workforce board is responsible for managing the training list in their geographic area. So our workforce board reviews and certifies trainers that are physically located in Kane, DeKalb, and Kendall counties. Every other workforce board is responsible for doing the same in their geographic area. So when you combine the work of all the workforce boards in the state of Illinois, you come up with a comprehensive statewide list of eligible trainers. And participants from one area may seek training from a provider in another area. So they're not bound to stay in our 3-county area necessarily. Next slide, please. We all prescribe certain performance standards for our program. And these, again, are data-driven measures of basically how successful our program is. Ultimately, data from the workforce areas across the state is aggregated and evaluated by the Department of Labor to gauge Illinois' overall performance. Some of the factors involve gaining credentials, skill gains, as well as wages. The feds also look at how many of our clients retain their employment outcome into the future, specifically looking at that at the second quarter following exit from our program, and also in the fourth quarter after exit from our program. So what I want to emphasize about this slide is that performance is not an instant result. We have a relationship with our participants that oftentimes is a minimum of 3 years. They might be in a 2-year training program. They're getting case management services throughout that time frame. And then we're mandated to provide no less than 12 months of follow-up service following exit from our program. So this is a long-term effort. It doesn't happen overnight. And hence there is a significant lag time between the delivery of service and the evaluation of the performance of our program. Next slide. So before I wrap up, I wanted to just highlight some of the timeframes and benchmarks that you've already heard about from Maria and I, but you will continue to hear about periodically. These are benchmarks that apply to our Title I program. If they sound familiar, I hope they sound familiar, but I'd like you to be mindful of these as we proceed into future months so that you can better understand the reporting that we give you. First of all, each annual allocation of funding has a 2-year lifespan, and the full allocation must be spent at the end of that period. During that 2-year time frame, we are required to hit certain benchmarks. First, you'll see 80% of our funds must be obligated by the end of the first year. We typically reach this figure by contracting and committing our funds to various vendors and service providers prior to the end of the first year, in addition to any funds that we may have expended in the first year. Meeting this benchmark is basically, I would suggest to you, a test of whether or not our program is off to a good, solid start by the time we reach the midpoint of the lifespan of the award, with the idea that at the end of the first year, we've set ourselves up for successfully expending the full award by the end of the second year. The next three benchmark figures involve meeting certain minimum standards for training activities and goals for our youth program. First, 50% of our funding must go to training. So we're not permitted to simply take this grant and use these funds to hire staff and incur operating expenses and provide endless counseling services to individuals. We do have to satisfy the requirement of making solid investments in our clientele achieving training outcomes. And then in the youth category, 75% of our funds must go toward the out-of-school population. Again, as I mentioned earlier, this is typically the dropout youth that have dropped out of and are not completing their education. And so that's a mandate of the program, as well as spending 20% of our annual youth expenditures on work-based experience, which again is that internship program that I mentioned earlier. When our annual allocation is awarded to us, we don't receive the full allocation in one sort of giant check on day one. Funds are drawn down as they're needed to cover program costs, and we do utilize the county's New World financial system to track all of our transactions, which creates an audit trail that we need in order to pass muster during our annual monitoring performed by the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, as well as the county's single audit performed by Baker Tilly. The single audit is underway as we speak, and typically Baker Tilly selects WIOA Title I for audit and testing typically every other fiscal year. And Title I has been selected for the fiscal year that ended November 30th of last year. So finally, I wanted to just say that Maria Gonzalez reports all of our prior month expenditures, accruals, and obligations for our program by the 20th of each month. And this is why there's a lag time in the reporting that we provide to you. For example, in your packet today, you have financial reports that are effective through the end of December. And that data was reported to our funder, DCEO, by the 20th of last month. And then my last slide, I want to just share with you our contact information. We have what is called a one-stop job center located here in downtown Batavia. And this is in essence the front door of the public workforce system in our three-county area. And visitors to our WorkNet Batavia location can access not just the Title I program, but a wide array of, I think, roughly a dozen different programs that are part of the public workforce development system. So we provided our location, our hours, our contact information. We are on social media. And we do provide a service in kind of a hybrid format with meetings and workshops, one-on-one consultations, both in person as well as virtually using Zoom. And then I think before I close the presentation completely, I'd like to ask Israel to give you some figures regarding the traffic through our one-stop center, and then also give you an idea of what our performance looks like so far regarding our participants in Title I. Israel?
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, everybody, for having us. I want to start with highlighting some activity in the One Stop Center from the first half of program year 2021 and the first half of program year 2022. There's two ways in which we contact our clients, or our clients contact us, and that is either they come to the front door, they can call, they can email, they can reach out to us on social media. So we have two components involved in how we track that. We have the in-person contacts, and then we have the other interactions, which is the other venues. For program year 2021, we saw 460 people in person and 384 in other client interactions, leading to 844 contacts for that year. In program year 22, we saw 1,299 people in person and 857 other client interactions, which leads to 2,156 contacts for the year. It is apparent that as we're moving forward, we're moving away from the shutdown that we have due to COVID. The system is opening up. People are feeling more comfortable getting out there and looking for the resources that they require or need in order for them to be able to find employment or an education opportunity that's going to get them to the career they need. Regarding Title I, in program year 21, the first half, we saw 910 new people or new individuals coming into our Title I system. In the same time frame, but in the year PY 22, we saw 750. There's a slight drop there, but it does not have an implication on our numbers. And we continue to be pretty level during that time, where at 21, we were at 67% by the mid-year, and in 22, we were at 69% by mid-year. So we're consistently meeting or exceeding our goals when it comes to our programs. New training participants for 21, the first half of 21 was 114, and new training participants for PY 22, the first half, was 161. And in that aspect, there was an increase on 2022 in regards to people entering our Title I programming. For fiscal year 21, we actually have 445 people that enter employment at the second quarter, as you were stating earlier, with the way that it is measured through the state. So 444 people gain employment out of 576 that were exited out of the system. That means that we were at a 77% rate at that time. Thank you.
Thank you, Israel. I guess at this time, I'd like to ask if there are any questions. I hope that that information is helpful and gives you an idea of the nature of the service and the process that a participant would go through to access our programming. Any questions?
Gordy.
Hey, this is Louis. Scott, are you going to share this presentation with us?
I certainly can.
If you would, that would be helpful. There was a lot.
Actually,
There's a lot there.
I think what I'll do is direct you to the county's website, where I believe Mr. Peters will likely post the PowerPoint alongside your agenda for the meeting today.
That would be perfect, because there was a lot there. I'd like to look at it again later. First question, Gary.
Yeah. I brought this up last month and they told me to wait for the presentation. Scott, so my question last month and remains, we're spending a lot of money on truck driving schools, and the trucking companies are paying people to go through school with on-the-job training. So they don't really need our support because they're so desperate to hire people. They can train people on the job. Things like healthcare don't have the ability to train on the job. They actually need people that have gone through the schools. Wouldn't this money be better spent on those types of positions rather than truck driving schools when truck driving companies are already paying it? I mean, it seems like we're using money that could be used better served for the county and for people.
Well, you're certainly entitled to that view. I did get your question last month, and I did follow up with members of our team. We are not seeing those circumstances in the marketplace that you're citing. So I'm not familiar with your source of information for that, but I will tell you that ultimately it is a consumer choice. Our participants do get to determine what career track they're going to pursue. And I'll be very blunt with you. Truck driving there's two elements to truck driving that make it particularly attractive to an unemployed job seeker. Number one, the training is short. I guess there's three items. Number two, training is available from proprietor vendors that can begin they can begin the curriculum frequently throughout the year, as opposed to a curriculum that might be aligned along an academic year where you really only have a couple of opportunities to jump into training at a community college. A truck driving proprietary school might start that training once a month. So there's more entry points to that program. And as mentioned, it is a quick training program. And finally, it typically results in an attractive wage. So by its very nature, it is of interest to the job seeker community. And we do see a lot of participants go down that path. Also, because of Chicagoland's strategic position in the nation's transportation grid, there are plentiful jobs in that particular area. And we call it TDL, transportation, logistics, distribution functions are plentiful in Chicagoland.
Right.
I don't know if that answers your question, but that's my take on that situation based on the input from my staff.
Yeah. So I just did a quick Google search. Like, Prime Trucking all you have to do is pass the pre-test, the written test with the Secretary of State, and they will pay you, I want to say, I think it was $9,000 a month. No, I can't remember. I don't remember what the number was, but they'll pay you to be on the road immediately with one of their drivers training. And they'll give you a $250 bonus just for passing the permit exam. So it's immediate. You go to, I mean, that's just one example. You go to Prime Trucking, you say, I passed my test the first time. They give you a check for $250 for passing it. And then they put you on the road training with somebody and paying you immediately. No money out of our pocket. All they have to do is go take the written exam. So, I mean, I don't know where you guys looked, but I Googled it, and like the first 5 companies that come up, they're training drivers on the fly immediately. So we're spending $5,000-$6,000 with a truck driving school. Sure, they can start immediately with the training, but we're paying that money, whereas trucking companies are paying them to do it. So I still don't understand why that money isn't better spent where there isn't on-the-job training immediately available to people that want to do it.
Well, understand, I'm not presenting our program as a program that acts in a silo. I mean, we provide assistance to individuals to seek training. That doesn't mean that there's no other aid available. There's literally a dozen different programs at the table around our public workforce system. And part of our task is to, frankly, just coordinate among these programs to make sure that they're implemented in concert with each other. So, and again, that's not to say that there aren't public sector programs available or private sector programs available that can also meet these needs. I don't know how else to answer your question.
Okay, I'll try. Anyone can get a job driving a truck with a trucking company, $0 out of our funds budget. Anybody, through no help from us at all. But for example, in healthcare, there is not that on-the-job training available. So wouldn't that money be better spent sending someone to nursing school when there isn't an outside source for them to get into that industry?
Okay, so Gary, Louis here, I'm going to jump in. Couple of things. First of all, we have, in my understanding, a list of providers and a list of things that we can do. I don't know what company you're talking about, but I doubt that it's on our list. So when Scott's office, when somebody comes in and says, hey, I want to get trained as a truck driver, they have a list of people. And when people come in, we send them, I mean, we help them with their interests. If somebody wants to be a truck driver, great. They have a list of people, they have groups they work with. So if these companies, they're just not part of this network. And Mr. Ford, I think, had a little bit better on that as the chair of that committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair Ford. So Scott indicated earlier about how the funds are already regulated on where they can go to. So that's already established in the beginning too, is that you're asking us, it seems like, that if somebody comes in not to have a program for trucking or whatever, to refer them to someone else, which means that they don't get our assistance. So therefore, we're taking a risk on that assistance working like it's supposed to. And not everything is as clear as it seems when you read about it. I know people personally who have signed up to go to businesses to try to get into their program and been unsuccessful for whatever reason. So it's not that cut and dry. So the funds are regulated. I would ask Scott to, the board itself is made up of a number of people, but it's designated on where those people should come from to be a part of the board. So it's not, this is all regulated. It's not something we come up with as board members. I've been on this board for a while, and I believe we comb, when I say comb, I'm talking about word for word, our bylaws on a couple of different occasions, and some of the programs word for word to make sure we match what is required. Also, another part of that Scott has mentioned is that them being a part of, you talked about a part of the list, to get on that list that's approved by the state. So for us to use somebody else, they have to be priorly approved. And if any one of these companies are out there that can be reached and want to get on that list, that would make that job easier to do that.
Also, one other thing that, having gone to WorkNet, in fact, I encourage you, go over to WorkNet and see what they really do there. If somebody comes in, especially this 75% of the dropout kids, as we call them nicely, if they go into our workforce development group and they say, I want to be a truck driver, we don't just send them off to truck driving school. They also make sure that they're prepared for that they know the soft skills, that when you do go to truck driving school, you've got to be on time, that here's how you do your resume, here's how you present yourself. There's a lot of additional education that goes into this workforce development, so that we make sure that these people, especially these younger children, these younger ones that have dropped out of school, that we set them up to succeed. And I think that's a vital part too, that we don't talk enough about.
Yeah. Madam Co-Chair, one more thing, and that is,
Those people aren't old enough to drive trucks, so that's irrelevant.
the other thing is, what I love about the program is that more assistance is provided than that when as needed. One of my biggest things when I first got a part of this board is bringing up health, childcare, transportation.
Yes.
Those are big parts on having somebody be able to get back and forth to classes, back and forth to work. And there's been many of, Israel has been really good about letting me know when we've been able to provide those assistance, because that is a great thing. One of my biggest things and I hate to see the unemployment office leave Aurora, but one of the biggest problems is people trying to get back and forth to where it was at.
Right.
They would literally be walking where there's no sidewalk or walkway to get to the unemployment office. Once you get past Indian Trail, you're in the street. And so I myself have picked up many people and dropped them off back there, but we work all that with transportation and other things. So everything is well looked at and broken down. If there's some other ideas, may I more invite to bring it to the table and have them go through the process so they can be a part of the program. But we just can't flip a switch like that. Everything is really designated on how it should be done. It's regulated.
I hope that answers your question enough, but I do have to move on, Gary, so thank you. We have Mrs. Bates and then I thought I saw another hand. I think David too was after that. So go ahead, Mrs.
I was interested in the unemployment numbers, Mr. Berger. Do we have demographics and locations on that? I know unemployment is at record low numbers, but is that for all of our ethnic groups, all of our locations? I'm wondering how towns like Aurora are doing. right
So
now.
if you want to contact me with your specific request for data, we can work with our colleagues at IDES. They have designated staff that actually gather that information and can make it available upon request. So we would want to work with you to craft your request to be very specific to make sure that IDES gives you the information you're looking for.
Okay, thank you. About the cap, the $10,000 cap, can there be exceptions to that? What if someone's right on the verge of getting a degree or a certification and they need one more class or something?
Generally, no. That's a cap that's established by our board. Each workforce board is responsible for establishing that cap. And actually, ours is slightly higher than other jurisdictions nearby. I think in Cook County, for example, they've actually specified caps for different types of training, nursing versus something else.
I'm wondering if we can scrape up
think-
another $100 or something.
I think it's also, I mean, we have to have guidelines, but I think if a person is one class away from getting something that the college is gonna, help them find opportunities, or maybe there's a grant or the women's club, or, I mean, we don't live in a vacuum here in King County. That's the one thing good. And that usually if people have a need and they reach out, there's enough smart people that we can usually get people what they need, because we're not gonna give up on somebody because they are one class short.
Okay,
Let me just go a little further in responding to that question. So first of all, I want to reiterate and emphasize that nobody goes into training prior to being assessed and evaluated, tested, and developing a career development plan for themselves, an employment plan for themselves. So before you can even register for a course with our scholarship money, you must have a sound, achievable plan in place. So oftentimes we have clientele that might register for a program at ECC or Waubonsie, and they might tap into an Access Pell Grant funding alongside Title I funding. But my point is that they're not going to be allowed to initiate that training without having a sound plan for completing that training.
okay, good. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Right.
One more little question.
Go ahead.
Do you need a satellite office? One little office in Batavia for 3 counties? Can we?
So we have actually 3 offices, and we have 1 in each county. Batavia is our Kane County-based office. We also have an office in Yorkville, down in Kendall, and in the city of DeKalb, in DeKalb County.
Thank you, bye. Thank you.
Okay, thank
Done.
you. Okay, did we have another question? Or are we good now?
Yes, I had one question. This is
Okay,
David.
I
Young.
thought so, Dave. Go ahead.
So if there is, Mr. Berger, if there is a particular line of work all of a sudden that starts, being available, and I'm thinking of precision machining, machinists, precision assembly work, would you guide individuals toward those open positions? Meaning if someone comes to your office and they're just say, I don't know what I want to do, but I want to get into something that is going to be stable, whatever. Would you point them in that direction? And that's my first question. And number 2, do you look for those kinds of job opportunities so that you can possibly fill them with people that come to your office?
We do. And to answer your first question, there's no defined process necessarily. Job seekers may come to us with their own and know what they want to do and have a good idea. Others may be open to suggestions. So that can work either way. Ultimately, our counseling staff, their job is to make sure that the individual has a career path established, a training path established that will lead to meaningful employment, and that they're well suited for that. And so there's a case by case, client by client evaluation that occurs. And all that is memorialized with, documentation notes and case notes and that kind of thing. So it's a case by case process. And then the second part of your question, I wanted to say that we do attempt to source candidates for area employers. I didn't mention it in the presentation, but we can work the other way around with the job placement process by starting with the employer, understanding what their vacant positions, their employment needs are, and then sourcing talent from our pool of clientele. So an employer might avail themselves of assistance from our agency. We might help with testing. If there's a testing process that they want to take candidates through, we might help with spreading the word regarding their vacancy and their job opportunity. It just depends.
Okay, so I know in my line of business, I know that for sure, assembly, meaning assembling precision equipment or machines that does pay a nice wage, as well as a machine operator, machine tending, or just a machinist in general. Those are nice paying jobs, and those are needed throughout the area. And just keep your eye on those, because there are people that can come out of high school or even high school dropouts, learn a trade and go right into those positions, and those are available. So keep your eyes out for those.
Let me jump in on that one, Dave. That's excellent. We have, and I think maybe Scott can do a little, or Israel next month, a little presentation on maybe what some of our partners are, because I'm from the manufacturing world myself, and one of the programs, and I can't think of the name of it, that they push a lot from the 18-year-old to 24 is this you guys know it, you're going to say it as soon as that, it's a 6-week internship program where they spend a couple weeks and they teach these students soft skills, and then they actually go and they work in these different manufacturing groups. And there's several of those. There's a lot of apprenticeship things going on with our partners that are addressing a lot of these manufacturing issues.
So what we do is we will provide you with periodic performance reports. These are not necessarily the performance benchmarks that I covered in the presentation today, which are prescribed at the federal level, but a periodic snapshot of activity, highlighting our most popular training areas of training, our most popular training providers. Again, we see a lot of folks seek out training from the community colleges. So that you can expect to see that, maybe as often as quarterly.
Okay. Yeah, that would be awesome. I think that will kind of bring a lot more of this clearer. So, okay.
Right. That information is really the target audience for that information. It is not the county board. It's really the Workforce Development Board, because again, the Workforce Development Board is really the entity that the 3 counties created to oversee and manage this program. But we do roll that information up for them periodically, and we're happy after we present that to them, we'd be happy to send it to you so you can see that as well.
Yeah, and I particularly like to see that, because I am, it's always good to know as a county board member when people are talking about jobs and careers and opportunities and things like that, to know, like who our WorkNet actually partners with and what kind of programs are really out there, so that we can steer more people your way. I love the numbers you're getting, but I think that you guys, because of the expertise you have, can really be doing a lot more if we, as county board members, understand better what's going on and help funnel people your way and like cheerlead for you is what I call it.
Just to kind of put this in context. So we're a 3-county workforce area. The only workforce area that receives larger allocations of funding in the state of Illinois is Cook County. And we typically outpace all the collar counties in terms of our training and employment figures. Israel highlighted some of those figures for you earlier. Just understand that when you stack that up against the Will, DuPage, Lake, McHenry programs, we sort of exceed all of those performance figures. I think that's primarily by nature of the fact that we are a 3-county workforce area.
Madam Co-Chair,
Go ahead.
just one more thing. Thank you. This is Ford again. Just one thing to keep in mind is that workforce development does not do any training themselves.
Correct.
They work with people who do the training for profit and non-for-profit. The one thing that like to keep in mind is that what is needed when it talks about other programs or other job opportunities is to find people or find programs who would do that training. That's one of the biggest things when I first got involved in workforce development was with manufacturing, is that it was tough to find the schools, the colleges wasn't doing the math and they wasn't learning in high school. So that was one issue. And when all the machines got reprogrammed to using technology, I think that's, if I remember right, that's what kind of brought about this workforce development opportunity. But we really need entities to actually develop a training program, and that would really help having people train for these machines and manufacturing. Last time I checked, Waubonsie or none of the colleges kind of did anything like that, but that is the biggest part of that when it comes to this. The one thing that happened with in the medical field is you had all these pop-up, I hate to call it like that, but you had these pop-up schools that was doing some type of training in different fields of the medical. I remember one used to be on Lincoln Avenue and I believe in North Aurora, Batavia.
Oh, yeah.
That's they want them closing down. But those are type of things that we need to happen that would really help execute some of these ideas and thoughts is have people put those together.
Well, what do you mean? We need more pop-up schools?
Well,
You don't mean that, do you?
I don't want to call them pop-up schools,
Well,
but we
the
need training.
for-profit.
We need training entities, whether it's non-for-profit or for-profit.
uh-huh.
It would make a big difference.
But they have to be very carefully vetted because a lot of.
Oh,
them-
yes, and that's the reason
Absolutely.
why when Scott was talking about the list, they have to
that-
qualify.
That's what we offer, is that consumer protection of
Yes.
our
So
clients.
they have to get qualified in order to be a part of the program.
Good, yeah.
So, but that would make a difference, is having people who able to do the training. I would love to see we right now got a agreement with the 3 colleges which was mentioned earlier. It'd be nice if it was focused there. It would make life a lot easier. But for a reason it doesn't work that clean. But that's one thing that would really help.
All right. Good discussion, and let's keep Scott on the ball every month because these are really interesting and important things to keep talking about. And I would like for him to kind of showcase at Israel some of our partners and some of the great work that is being done. And then, also talk about how do we get more partners for different things. I know I had a student come up in East Aurora, and they're looking for a school to go to that they can get, I think it was respiratory therapy. It was something that Waubonsie didn't offer. So I sent them to DuPage, but I think St. Augustine might be the one you're talking about in Aurora that might have some things too. So I think that there is some opportunities, and the more we understand what these different partners do, then maybe there's other partners that we can kind of, bring to the table and get them in.
They don't have to be non-for-profit.
Right. They can be for-profit or non-for-profit. So,
Madam Chair, I just saw yesterday, St. Augustine is doing this pre-apprenticeship construction
yes.
program, so
Mhm. Yeah, they are. And that's through I'm trying to think what the name of that board was, IWA or
Yeah.
something. Yeah, IWA. So, all right, unfortunately, we have to move along, but thank you very much, Scott and Israel. And please feel free to come every month and dazzle us.
Fill us up.
Yes.
We will
Bye.
definitely be at your meetings periodically with some updates and reports. I do want to kind of wrap this up by saying, understand that we are not the beginning and end of workforce development. Our programming is a cog in the state's wheel of 22 workforce areas, and Illinois is a cog in the U.S. Department of Labor's wheel of 50 states. And we're not intended to serve everybody. We're tasked with serving a sector of the workforce that has the greatest difficulties of gaining employment, the biggest barriers and challenges to being successful. So as you talk about workforce development, be mindful that you might be interested in talking about issues that don't fall into our wheelhouse, are not really relevant to the Title I program. So we certainly don't manage all employment in the 3-county area. We're just one piece of the puzzle. So, and with that, I would like to turn it over to Maria Gonzalez to walk you through a battery of financial reports that we provide you on a monthly basis. And again, just note that she'll touch on some of those benchmarks and deadlines that I made reference to in the PowerPoint. Maria?
Thank you, Scott. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
My name is Maria Gonzalez. I am the fiscal manager for the Workforce Development Division. Here with you, we do have the monthly financial reports through December 31st. Today is my due date to submit the January figures, which I will be doing once the meeting concludes. As Scott mentioned, we do get an annual allocation and the grant does run for a two-year cycle. With your packet, you have 2 financial reports that look very much the same. One of them is the WIOA 21, of which we got that funding July 1st, 2021. It does end June 30th of this year. And we have until then to finalize to spend down the full allocation. In that year, we received the $6.5 million. With the reporting that I will be submitting today, we will have fully expended adult, youth, and admin funding streams. We just have the dislocated funding that we're still trying to work through. In the middle section of this report, you see the obligations section. This is the area where we have to hone in the first year of each funding year. You'll see right now for the WIOA 21, it's at 100%. Meaning that what we report to the state through expenditures, through accruals, through obligations, we are telling the state that we will fully spend this money by the end of June. And that comes through our actual expenditures, any expenses that came through that'll be paid in the next month, and any commitments to payments that we have.
Not to interrupt you, Maria, I'm sorry about that, but could we advance the packet?
Yes.
So that the screen contains the information that Maria is highlighting for you?
That is
Thank
on
you.
page 5 on your packet. Thank you, Scott. The bottom section of this report where you see the direct training, that is the 50% benchmark that we are required to meet for the adult and dislocated worker funds. If you go to page 6 of your packet, that is now the WIOA 22 grant. This allocation was awarded to us July 1st of 2022. We have until June 30th of 24 to fully spend down. This grant, we are now adhered to meeting that 80% benchmark obligation. Going to the middle section of that report, the first tab, the left-hand side is the obligations that we report to the state. Now it says that adult is at 51, dislocated workers at 40. We are not allowed to report unspent salary and operations figures that we budgeted for. So we'd really just report our unspent contract funds. If you go to the right-hand side where it says projections, obligations, accruals, that is our expenditure plan, in essence, saying here is how we plan to spend down the allocation that has been awarded to us. Again, the 57% training is combined for both. They look at both grants and combine it and say, okay, with the money that has been allocated to you via both grants, you are at 57% of awarding that for training purposes to the participants that come through your doors. Page 7 is the trade grant. This is a grant that, again, is through DCEO. These are for layoff aversions, companies that are about to close their doors. This is a more restrictive grant. However, this does allow for more than the 10,000 training cap because of the various guidelines through this grant. This grant runs October through September of the given year. We have until September 30th of 23 to fully spend down this allocation. Are there any questions?
I have a question. Louis here. So Scott mentioned in his presentation that we will probably see these funds going down as far as the amount we get, the total grant amount. And that concerned me. I understand the unemployment rates are so low, but I think that we sit here and we talk a lot about, we're looking at training jobs for the future. You know, I mean, we got solar coming up. We've got all these robotics. We've got manufacturing that is like really, really intense now, you know, but we've got so much training. So it is, are we going to be sitting here and talking about how we don't have money to train people for these new jobs? And it's a hard question to answer. I just, you know.
Well, I guess I can answer that question. So first of all, we aren't provided enough money to train everybody, and we're not asked to train everybody. You might be interested in training everybody, but Title I, as I said before, is tasked with serving populations that have barriers, needs. We're talking about we're talking about job seekers that might be among the most difficult to employ in private sector jobs. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, I think, I think as our workforce, you know, we have such low unemployment rates that I would think that you're seeing more and more people, because the people that are coming to you are the ones that have had trouble finding jobs because they've got other issues in their life. They don't interview well. They don't know how to look for a job. They have transportation issues. They have childcare issues. They have mental health issues. And I think that population, which is the ones that we have to serve, I think is growing, not diminishing.
Yes, and you know, I'll be honest, our program does present some challenges to people, and we don't successfully enroll all job seekers in our services because for various reasons, they don't want to participate in the program. For example, every one of our enrollees has to go through testing. And we're talking about testing that is a kind of on par in terms of a time frame with like taking the SAT. It might be a 3-hour test that they have to sit for. And there are some individuals that they're not willing to do that. So we do have to do some recruitment and to fill the ranks of our participant pool.
Okay.
3-hour test?
Yes,
Assessment tests.
it's
Yeah.
mandated.
Yeah, you know, assessment to see what you're. Yeah.
This is not our choice.
I
Right,
know young people who would freak out and run out the door.
And it is a problem. So we've got to get creative on, there's a lot of opportunities, I think. But anyway,
That's why I emphasize that we're not the beginning and end of workforce development, because these mandates that I've summarized for you today, you know, they're there to ensure the public is getting their money's worth.
Right.
The
But
public
you're all,
is
yeah.
paying for the cost of helping these individuals skill up, get their credentials, and get on their feet in a private sector job.
Mhm.
So it's understandable that with federal programs, there are standards that have to be met in order to avoid waste, fraud, abuse, most notably waste. It would be, I mean, it's difficult to get all of our trained individuals jobs. But our goal is to get all of our participants to complete their credential, complete their training. That's one measure of success. And then, as I talked about earlier, get a job, get a wage, and then retain that wage.
Mhm.
Okay, any question on the financials from anybody before we move on? Ms. Bates?
Not exactly about the financials, but how do people find us? Do we advertise or stuff like that?
Well, it's multiple ways. I would say most by referral. I mentioned earlier the network of the network that exists at the Public Workforce Development System table. There's a lot of cross collaboration among the partner agencies, and individuals are frankly referred, into the appropriate service. We don't have a robust advertising campaign, but the one-stop system is the intended portal that clientele are to come through.
All right, thank you, Maria, as always. All right, thank you, Scott.
You're welcome.
Okay, moving along. I have no specific comments because we got a lot to cover, but do you have anything?
Not particularly.
Okay, all right. So then let's move right along to the job committee priorities.
Good morning, Mark Van Kerkhoff. If you don't mind, Madam Chairman, if I could do A and C, I'm expected upstairs for another meeting.
That would be
So I'd
fine.
like to cover those briefly, and then I will let Chris and Karen carry on with the rest of the
Okay.
information. So the first item under A is a resolution. Back in November of last year, the county board passed a resolution supporting participation in the Greater Chicagoland Economic Partnership. This is a follow-up resolution to that, where we're actually now committing the funding, which is a little over $57,000 for our first year of participation in the 7-county and city of Chicago effort. To pay for services that will be provided under contract by World Business Chicago. It also authorizes Madam Chairman to sign the contract. It's the same agreement that the other 7 counties and the city of Chicago are entering into for doing this. I will also note that the contract in your packet says draft because it was just being finalized. I want to thank our state's attorney's office for their a review of that. We now have the final document, which will get swapped out as it goes through to the county board meeting. Also note that at the February 28th Committee of the Whole this month, there'll be a much longer presentation about some of the economic development work that we're doing locally for Kane County and the regional effort. So encourage everybody to either be there or tune in to the Committee of the Whole on the 28th. And with that, I'd ask for you to consider this resolution and pass it on to the full county board.
I'll make the motion.
Pardon? You'll move it?
Yes.
Lewis will second. Is there any questions about this? Okay, seeing none, let's call the roll.
Bates,
Bates, yes.
Doherty,
Already is.
Ford, Strathman,
Strathman, yes.
Young,
Young, yes.
Lewis,
Lewis, yes.
Allen,
Aye.
passes.
All righty.
Great, thank you. And then Blair, if you could put the presentation for item C, ARPA projects update. Thank you. So, and this is a pretty much a repeat of a presentation I gave to the ARPA committee. So I'll go through this quickly, but I wanted to highlight it to the Jobs Committee as well, since a number of these programs will be dually going through the ARPA committee for their approval of use of ARPA funds. But for those activities that require signing a contract or an agreement or whatever, those contracts and resolutions will be coming through either Jobs Committee, Agriculture Committee, or potentially Development Committee. So I'll go through this quickly, and if there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. But Development Department, we submitted 5 applications for using ARPA funds for economic recovery and sustainability. one project for the Fabulous Fox Water Trail, one for the countywide economic development effort, one for helping our agriculture, which is our number one industry, and then manufacturing and tourism. The goal for these programs were that these are what we call internal, external applications. The funding is actually going to benefit the community and businesses through these funds. We're looking to turbocharge existing programs and activities that our planning team is already working on. We would keep applying for other grants, which we have been. And then the main thing is these are really addressing economic recovery areas not already being addressed by our municipalities because they're sort of countywide sectors. We are working with the ARPA team, Peter Phillips, our King County State's Attorney's Office, and the consultant EY to complete risk assessments. We're continuing to look for best practices in other programs. We want to work with established credible partners. And we also appreciate the ARPA team's been flexible in accommodating grant deadlines as we apply for additional funds. So this is just a summary of those 5 programs and the funding amounts that were allocated by the county board last April. I'll go through this quickly, but the Fabulous Fox Water Trail, you've all seen many presentations. You'll hear more updates from Karen in a minute. We are in 2023 going to be putting in the launch site signs, and then depending on grant awards, hiring a consultant to begin selecting locations for new and expanded launch sites. And we are waiting on word on 2 grants we applied for from DCEO, one for $500,000 and one for $100,000 before we begin dipping into any ARPA funds. The other one, the Economic Development Strategy Organization for Kane County. Chris will give you an update on that shortly, as well as I mentioned on the 28th. This is primarily being handled through Agriculture Committee, but we have 4 projects in the works to help our agricultural community as well. And then lastly, I'm actually, or manufacturing and tourism recovery and promotion. We are looking at working with IMEC on a program to help our manufacturers, modeled after a program launched in McHenry County. And then I'm actually meeting next week with our 2 convention visitors bureaus to take a look at how Cook County and other neighboring counties are using ARPA funds to help support the work of the convention visitors bureaus, of which we have 2 that cover most of Kane County. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, but wanted to give you that overview and roadmap for 2023.
Any questions? Okay, looks like we're good.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to
Thank
turn
you.
it over to Chris and Karen.
Okay, thank you. Enjoy your next meeting.
May I be excused to go to the same meeting?
No. Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah, after making us late, now you leave early.
I know, isn't it great?
You know, why we changed, let me just state it
Yes.
for understanding, so she can hear. You know, we was talking about with the assessment test, and I've talked with this about you and a few other people. What I'm not saying that our schools don't have good education, because they do. It's just certain things are not being taught that need to be used to get certain jobs. And that's what's need to be understood, very important. Years ago, when I was working for the city, it's a young lady from our engineering department used to come over and teach English as a second language.
Mhm.
And I asked her a question: what is the difference between what you're doing than what Wabansi was doing? And there's some other areas doing the same thing. She says, Ron, some people need to learn their ABCs as adults before they can learn the English language. And what I found out about as a contractor, and I talked to you about this, there's the old way of learning trades is not what it used to be. You learn from somebody in the family or somebody in a neighborhood. And I've had people come work for me who's very much interested in working with their hands, and they don't know the difference between different types of hammers, screwdrivers, and do not know how to use a measuring tape. So there's other education that needs to take place before they can go into that. And if you just throw them in there, they're really lost. So the assessment test tells us where they're at in life. So one thing that's needed out in the community is these programs. I'm glad to hear about this pre-apprenticeship, is those other education parts need to be taught before they can go into an atmosphere. So there's some education that is needed in a lot of cases, because things are changing and they're changing rapidly. The schools can't keep up.
When I taught at Wabansie, I'd try to get, all of my students to pick a career, especially a green career, an environmental career. And they'd say, I can't do, they'd eliminate themselves from 3/4 of those jobs because of math.
Yeah.
They just needed the ABCs of math, which I guess is what.
And schools are being told how they have to teach math, and it's a difference. That's all. I don't want to stretch it out.
Yeah, let's go. All right. Thank you, Mavis. Have a great weekend if we don't see you again. All right, we will turn it over to Chris.
Thank you. And I do apologize. I'm a little congested, but also I do need to leave at about 11:55 for my next event as well. Busy bee as I tend to be. But just in terms of the RISE grant update, just right now we are working with the award-winning procurement team here at the county to get this RFP out, as well as our RFP for the economic development consultant that we are looking to do as part of our ARPA project. So hopefully my goal for next month is to start talking about our meeting about the applications that we have received. We still have the goal, the timeline of having this strategic plan created by November for approval by the board December. Right now, I don't see any roadblocks to that timeline, but the jobs committee is going to be the primary committee to hear all of the updates for that. So that's it for this month, but this is going to be a continuing item on every month just because we want to give updates. But with that, I'll take any questions.
Any questions on RISE? Okay, move along.
Thank you. This next one, moving to the Greater Chicagoland Economic Partnership update. I'm actually a little bit more, there's a lot of exciting things going on. So we met as a team with some local partners from North Aurora and Elgin with the World Business Chicago data team. And part of our contract will be utilizing them as data service providers for economic development data. I'm proud to announce, actually, we did our test run of our first data request this week. We received a request from New York from the Austrian embassy for salary data in manufacturing with specifics to metals. So we're going to have a whole data table of the median salary positions for different people who work, from the line workers to managers to HR. I'm getting all of this worked on right now, and I'm excited to share that with the committee next month once I have the full table. But it's also it's a great example of the partnership that we are forming with the GSEP. And their data team is top notch. They have access to many different services that are subscription based, and so what we do now is we don't have to pay for that. We don't have to sign up for that. Instead, I compile a report and then send a request, and then we bounce it back to make sure we get the right information. And so far, so great. So they're a wonderful team. And like I said, one of the things I'd like to do with the jobs committee is just as we get data, share that with the committee members and the co-chairs, just because it's a lot of interesting stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely.
The other thing with GSEP is coming up, there's a lot of events on March 1st. We will be doing, there's an event in the city where we'll be celebrating companies from across the region, just highlighting the businesses that are doing great things. There's a company from King County. I don't know if I'm allowed to share that information yet, but there will be announcements. Mark and Madam Chair will be going to that. It's a local company from Geneva is being awarded, and so that's great news. And then there's just a lot of events and things going on. The other thing with the Greater Chicagoland Economic Partnership too is what we are going to start getting is just more and more economic data on a monthly and weekly basis. And the other thing that's great is we are privy to documents about projects in the county, around the county, in the region, and in the state. And they tell us where they are at in their timeline. So we can work within the system to be a part of that, make us aware of that, make us aware of what our partners are doing. There's a lot of open lines of communication between us, World Business Chicago, and the other counties. And compared to what we were doing with the Chicago Regional Growth Corporation, we're already off to a very strong head start.
Yeah.
And it's keeping me pretty busy, so.
Good.
Yeah, but with that, I'd like to have any questions about the GSAP.
Okay, I don't see any questions online. So go ahead.
Thank you. And with that, Karen?
Good morning. I'd like to give you a brief update on the Fabulous Fox Water Trail. As I've mentioned in meetings before, we submitted our application on November 2nd, and we're going through the evaluation stage with the National Park Service to be designated into the National Water Trail System. So since we met last month, we received an email from the Park Service on January 23rd, commending us on an incredibly strong application. So right now, our last requirement is to install our signage along the river, which I am working on with our landowners, both in Illinois and Wisconsin. And then the announcement will be made on June 3rd. The staff are sending our application on to the Interior Secretary, and different departments in the Interior Department need to review it. And then an announcement will be made on June 3rd. So keep your fingers crossed.
We'll mark our calendars for June 3rd.
Thank you.
That sounds good. Is there anything that anybody has to do? Like, do we have to like call our congressman or anything?
No, I've included in the application, we had over 40 letters of support, and a number of them were from elected officials in the
Excellent,
region.
excellent.
So
Good.
thank you for asking.
All righty. All right.
Well in hand.
Yes, it's good. On our way to success. All right, I have no new business. Anybody have any new business online? Okay, looks good. No public comments. I need a motion to
Alan moves the reports.
Thank you.
32nd.
Want to call the roll on it quick?
Bates, Doherty,
Aye.
Ford,
Yes.
Strathman,
Yes.
Young,
Yes.
Lewis,
Louis, yes.
Allen,
Alan, aye.
passes.
All right. There is no need for an executive session. And before we adjourn, I just want to thank everybody for your patience as we go from the one meeting to this one. And there's so much in the Jobs Committee and so much exciting things going on that I almost feel like we're cutting it short, but we have spent the last, hour and a half on this. So anyway, thank you very much. And with that, could I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Doherty.
Doherty and Young. that's what I
Strathman.
heard. All right. Anybody object? All in favor?